We have had a lot of requests to combine all of our Route 66 stories in one place, and today we've done just that. Starting with the birth of Route 66 all the way to the Route 66 revival, here is the entire story for you. I hope you enjoy it as we go beyond the exit. The birth of Route 66. What comes to your mind when you think of Route 66? Neon lights? Chrome diners? Maybe it's a family station wagon rolling west for the promise of something better, some great adventure, a slice of pure Americana. But when it started, it wasn't like that at all. Before it became the main street of America, Route 66 was an unpaved idea, a political compromise, a road stitched together from county routes and dirt paths, some of them barely navigable. It wasn't built for nostalgia either. It was built for business, and behind it was a man from Tulsa, Oklahoma, with a vision and a whole lot of resistance. So stick with us, travelers, because this is the real story of how America's most iconic highway was born. And we're going to discover it together as we go beyond the exit. In 1925, the federal government had a plan. The goal? A standardized system of numbered highways, connecting cities across state lines and putting an end to the chaos of mismatched signs, private tollways, and disconnected roads. They called it the U.S. Numbered Highway System, and it was going to be revolutionary. But what roads would be included, and which towns would be left behind? That's where a fellow by the name of Cyrus Avery comes in. Avery was a Tulsa businessman with one foot in oil and the other in civic development. He was sharp, stubborn, and saw roads not just as ways to get somewhere, but as a way to build somewhere. Appointed to the Joint Board on Interstate Highways, Avery was one of just 21 members chosen to design the new federal system. Most of the planners favored straight east-west corridors, routes like the eventual US 80 or US 30, connecting coastal cities through large population centers. But Avery saw something different. He proposed a bold diagonal route, starting in Chicago, cutting through St. Louis, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Amarillo, and down through Albuquerque and Flagstaff before finally reaching Los Angeles. Why the diagonal? Because Avery knew the country wasn't just its coasts, it was the heartland, and it needed a road that didn't just bypass the middle, but elevated it. He argued that this route would link the industrial Midwest with the agricultural Southwest, unlocking economic development in dozens of underserved towns and creating a commercial corridor for freight, oil, and tourism alike. But not everyone agreed with him. Eastern states, specifically Kentucky and Virginia, lobbied hard for a southern route to get the prized designation of U.S. Route 60. Now, I suppose there are some questions on why they weren't fighting over the number 66, but you had to remember that numbers that didn't end in a 0, 1, or 5 were not considered as important a route in the U.S. system. We've got a short video that explains the numbering system that was derived from the Planning Commission, and we'll drop it at the end of the video for you. They feared Avery's diagonal would drain traffic and money away from their own highways, and the fight would get heated. The whole thing came to a head in April 1926 when the American Association of State Highway Officials held a final round of negotiations. That's when a compromise was reached. The Virginia-Kentucky corridor would get Route 60. To Avery, it felt like second place. He'd fought hard for Route 60, and he'd lost. But that disappointment didn't last long, because if Avery couldn't have the number he wanted, he'd make the new one famous. The compromise called for Avery's route to be named US 62, something he wasn't very thrilled about. As he inquired to what numbers were left, he found out that US 66 was available. Believing this was a much easier number to say and remember, he sent a note requesting that this be the designation for his new highway. They wholeheartedly agreed, and Avery didn't waste any time. To begin with, he started the U.S. Route 66 Association in 1927, headquartered in Tulsa. Their mission was clear: get the road paved from end to end and get it into people's heads. They published brochures, promoted it as the shortest all-weather route to the Southwest, and pushed for federal and state funding. Avery gave speeches. He got reporters involved. He turned Route 66 into something more than a line on a map. It became an identity, and it worked. Now, in spite of all the promotion, when Route 66 was commissioned on November 11th, 1926, it was not a brand new road. It was a patchwork. Avery's diagonal corridor was made by linking together existing state and county roads. Some of them were paved, but many were not. In Illinois, Route 66 piggybacked off a stretch of concrete road already part of Illinois State Route 4, paved with Portland cement and reinforced with steel rebar. But once you crossed into Missouri and moved southwest, the road quality varied wildly. Most of those were developed from the old Ozark Trail, where the majority of the maintenance of that road was left to the ones that used it. Some sections were macadam, which is a gravel road coated with oil or tar. Others were nothing more than graded dirt tracks, prone to washing out or turning to dust. In Oklahoma, red clay roads were common. Arizona and New Mexico had long stretches of unimproved dirt or gravel winding through the mesas and deserts. Route 66 might have had a number, but in many places it was still just a hopeful line on a map. Now, construction and improvement fell largely to the states, with the help of the federal government for matching funds. Real progress came, though, during the Great Depression, when federal relief programs poured manpower into public works. The WPA, or the Works Progress Administration, and the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, were deployed to improve and pave huge stretches of the highway. Some roads were built by machinery, others by hands. Often prison labor was used. And in the Southwest, Navajo and Mexican-American laborers did much of the work under very harsh conditions. It wasn't until 1938 that every last mile of Route 66 was paved from end to end. Granted, old Route 66 wasn't the first coast-to-coast highway, but it was the first major U.S. road to be fully paved over such a long distance. And for the people who relied on it, that was enough. By the late 1930s, Route 66 was more than just a highway. It was a lifeline. During the Dust Bowl years, thousands of families from Oklahoma, Texas, even Arkansas, piled into beat-up trucks and sedans, heading west toward California's Central Valley, looking for work and stability. John Steinbeck called it the Mother Road in his novel, The Grapes of Wrath. But even as the highway served migrants and workers, it was also transforming life along the way. Route 66 cut through hundreds of small towns, many of which had never seen regular travelers before. And with that came opportunity. By the late 1930s, roadside businesses had begun popping up. Places like auto camps and grease rack garages, hand-painted diners, and tourist courts with creaky beds and screen doors that slammed. And some entrepreneurs got a little more creative than others. In Two Guns, Arizona, a canyon attraction featured a so-called Apache Death Cave, a desert zoo, and costume tours. In Foyle, Oklahoma, Ed Galloway was building what would become the world's largest totem pole by hand. The U-Drop Inn in Shamrock, Texas opened in 1936, a neon-lit Art Deco structure that looked like it belonged in a city, not in the middle of the Texas Panhandle. Most of these weren't polished theme parks. They were homegrown, handmade, just folks trying to make a living as the cars kept rolling past. So even before the neon glow and nostalgia, Route 66 had already started becoming something more than a road. It gave small towns a reason to believe they still mattered. By 1938, Route 66 was fully paved. From Chicago to Los Angeles, there was no more dirt and no more detours. The road was finally whole, and it wasn't built by machines alone. It was built by out-of-work farmers, by laborers on federal relief crews, by prisoners laying culverts in the heat. They didn't set out to build something iconic. They just needed the work. And the people who used it weren't chasing freedom or open skies or a vacation adventure. They were chasing jobs, safety, and a fresh start. Sometimes they didn't even know what was ahead, only that they couldn't stay where they were. And Cyrus Avery, well, he didn't get the number he wanted, but he did get the road built. And for him, that was enough. So long before the postcards and neon signs, Route 66 was a working road for working people. It didn't become a legend because of how it looked. It became one because of what it did. It got people in the small towns of America where they needed to go. Route 66 goes to war. In the 1930s, Route 66 carried families fleeing the Dust Bowl. But in the 1940s, it carried something else: war. After Pearl Harbor, Route 66, already a well-traveled corridor from Chicago to Los Angeles, was quickly pressed into service, hauling troops, fuel, and war machines to the front lines of the home front. That one decision turned America's Main Street into a road of military necessity. One musician decided to do his part, enlisting in the Marines and joining the war effort. Little did he know that when it was all over, inspiration would strike him in the form of a song during a very special road trip down US 66. So stick around to the end of the video to hear the whole story. So today we talk about a segment of Route 66's history you may not have heard about before, how it helped us win World War II as we go beyond the exit. After the United States declared war on Japan in December 1941, every American felt the impact. Gasoline was rationed, rubber was rationed, new cars stopped rolling off the assembly lines, and almost overnight, the nature of American travel changed. With the gas rationing, most families were only given 3 gallons per week. That wasn't quite enough to get across town, much less across the country. Highways like Route 66, once seen as a path to opportunity and adventure, became critical lifelines for the war effort. Another of these changes, the government imposed a 35-mile-per-hour victory speed limit. These combined with the rationing / civilian driving. Between 1941 and 1943, westbound civilian traffic through New Mexico dropped from over 17,000 cars a month to just 7,000. But Route 66 didn't go silent. It got busier. And now it was military. Convoys stretched for miles, literally. Army trucks, troop buses, tank haulers, fuel carriers. A single week on some stretches of the highway could see over 1,200 military trucks and thousands of soldiers on the move. This wasn't just a road anymore. It was a rolling supply line for the war. And all that traffic exposed a big problem. Route 66 looked great on a map, but in real life, it was full of narrow bridges, sharp curves, and old sections patched together with gravel and tar. In places like the Texas Panhandle and western Oklahoma, convoys kicked up so much dust that they had to slow down just to avoid rear-ending the truck ahead. But the real bottlenecks weren't in the deserts. They were in the hills. In Pulaski County, Missouri, one stretch of the road became a nightmare. It snaked along the ridge lines and dropped sharply into valleys, twisting and turning and daring drivers to make it through without disaster. During that first year of full military use, nearly 50 vehicle-related deaths were recorded on that stretch alone, most of them military and their families. Something had to give. So engineers did something radical. Using blasting caps and bulldozers, they blasted through solid rock, creating a straighter, safer grade that could handle the weight and pace of wartime convoys. It was the first time Missouri had attempted a highway cut of that scale, and it worked. Accidents dropped, convoys flowed through easier. The change kept men and materials moving toward the front lines. Do you know the name of this cut that was made in the Missouri hills? Well, if so, leave it in the comments below, because we're going to come back to it at the end of the video. You know, the war didn't just move people along Route 66, it planted them there. As military bases and defense plants sprang up across the Southwest, towns that had once served tourists and truckers suddenly found themselves thrust onto the front lines of the home front. Places like Barstow, Kingman, Amarillo, and Gallup, small crossroads before the war, suddenly became critical to America's defense. Take Waynesville, Missouri, a modest Ozark town where life moved slowly before the war. Practically overnight, Waynesville found itself on the doorstep of Fort Leonard Wood, one of the largest military training installations in the country. 32,000 workers flooded into that region just to build the base. Obviously, there wasn't enough housing, there wasn't enough food, and there wasn't enough road space. Locals were scrambling to keep up. Families actually rented out garages, attics, spare rooms. Boarding houses added cots in the kitchens. Grocery stores ran out of meat and other food, and restaurants turned people away. There simply wasn't room for all of them. And Missouri wasn't alone. All along Route 66, the story repeated itself. Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona trained 35,000 aerial gunners. The Navajo Ordnance Depot near Flagstaff employed thousands to store munitions. Fort Wingate in New Mexico became a major shipping hub for explosives headed to the Pacific Theater. And in the Mojave Desert, the Desert Training Center prepared soldiers for combat in North Africa. Every one of these installations needed workers, and every one of them pulled people into towns that had never seen crowds like that before. Many of the people who came were young men and women from rural America, some from the very communities Route 66 passed through. Others were the children of the Dust Bowl migrants who had already followed the road west in the 1930s. Now these kids were grown, and the country needed them. So some joined the Army. Some found jobs in construction or factories. Factories in Tulsa, Amarillo, and San Bernardino expanded production around the clock, and Route 66 became their shipping lane, delivering workers in one direction and shipping war goods in the other. I guess you could think of Route 66 during the war as more than just a highway. It became an economic artery, pumping labor, supplies, and opportunity across a country at war. It linked farms to factories and small towns to big missions. Hey, if you've ever thought about taking a Route 66 trip, I want to suggest something to you because it is a decommissioned highway and signage is not always the greatest, so it's easy to get lost. But not if you have a copy of this. This is the Easy Guide for Route 66, written by Jerry McClanahan. It has turn-by-turn directions, large and small maps, plus information about almost every town that you're going to be going through on the route. We still carry it with us in the vehicle whenever we go. You'll definitely be glad you did. We have an affiliate link for it down below, and it does help the channel out. Anyway, back to the video. When people think about World War II, they picture soldiers, but the war didn't just mobilize men, it mobilized everyone. When the war pulled young men off farms and out of factories, someone had to keep the home front moving. And across the country, especially in towns tied to Route 66, women stepped up. In places like Amarillo, Texas, the Pantex plant reopened in 1942 to produce artillery shells, and it was women who filled the lines. They worked long shifts that stretched into the night, and sometimes 6 and 7 days a week. It wasn't glamorous work or easy. It was tough, dangerous, and exhausting, but it mattered. In every town linked to the Mother Road, you could find women driving trucks, welding, running supply depots, and building the machinery needed to win the war. For many, it was the first time they had been allowed or asked to do jobs once considered off limits. So how did they get there? Well, some of them carpooled. Others jammed themselves in crowded buses to make it to the factories. Many were motivated by patriotism, but some just needed to support their families. However, some were motivated by something else. Finally, getting a chance to take on work they'd been told they couldn't do. Whatever the reason, they showed up, and in doing so, they helped change the face of the country, one shift at a time. It's kind of humbling to think about how many hands and how many unseen, hardworking people helped carry the war effort forward along that old highway. If your family was a part of the home front war effort, especially along Route 66 or anywhere else for that matter, leave me a note in the comments. We'd really like to hear from you about it. While the war effort was fought on the front lines, it was also fought on the home front. And along Route 66, small towns took on big tasks. It wasn't just factories building bombs and guns and airplanes. It was diners, gas stations, and local families who kept the whole country running. Before the war, most diners and service stations along Route 66 closed by sundown. But with military convoys and defense workers on the move, that all changed. In places like Adrian, Texas, the Phillips 66 Midway service station didn't close for a single night during the war. A small cafe inside it kept its coffee hot and its lights on 24 hours a day. Now, rationing hit every part of life. No new tires after 1942. We already mentioned that gas was limited to 3 gallons a week. Victory gardens filled empty lots with beans, tomatoes, beets, and whatever could be grown. Meat wasn't always guaranteed, so diners along the route improvised with victory stew on the meatless days. It seems ridiculous today as we're looking back at it with hindsight, but everyone in the country was concerned with a mainland attack. So even in the heartland, the town stayed on full alert. Blackout drills were common from Illinois to New Mexico. Volunteer wardens patrolled neighborhoods, checking windows and doors for a straight light. Civilians were ordered off the highways after 10 p.m. The chance of an air raid may have been slim, But with the bombings of Great Britain so fresh in everyone's mind, no one was taking any chances. Another section of the war effort that rarely gets mentioned are the thousands of African American families that went looking for work, mainly to find support, but also to get out of the Jim Crow South. In towns like St. Louis, Tulsa, Albuquerque, and Los Angeles, they found new jobs, building planes, loading munitions, and driving supply trucks. But the road wasn't welcoming to everyone. Even in wartime, segregation shaped the journey. Many motels, restaurants, and service stations along Route 66 refused to serve black travelers. Finding a place to sleep, eat, or even refuel often meant relying on word of mouth or on guys like the Negro motorist Green Book. In spite of all the barriers, African American families kept fueling the war effort. They made sure the badly needed troops and supplies kept flowing to the front. Their story is woven into the very pavement of Route 66, even if history didn't give them a fair share of the credit. By the time the war ended, Route 66 was more than a highway. It had carried soldiers, workers, and entire families toward new futures. In fact, it fueled one of the greatest westward migrations and urban migrations in U.S. history. In 1945, America and its allies had finally won the war, and across the country, people were just beginning to let it sink in. Soon the road would carry something else entirely, a feeling that America was finally ready to move, build, and dream again. One of those travelers and a dreamer was a young musician named Bobby Troup. In 1946, Bobby and his wife were heading west towards Los Angeles, taking the same highway so many veterans and dreamers were now following. And somewhere along that journey, inspiration struck. Bobby Troup penned a song, a simple swinging anthem that captured the spirit of post-war America. Few ever planned to motor west. Get Your Kicks on Route 66 wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a snapshot of the time. A nation back on the move, chasing something just beyond the horizon. When Nat King Cole recorded it, the song shot across the airwaves, and Route 66 became more than a road again. It became a symbol of freedom, adventure, and the wide-open future ahead. And just like that, the United States entered a new era, the golden age of road travel. And Route 66 would have an opportunity to shine brighter than it ever had. And in our next episode, that's exactly where we're headed. The golden age of Route 66. Oh, and before we go, as promised, I would reveal the drastic rock cut that was made through Route 66 in the Missouri Hills just outside of Fort Leonard Wood. Did you guess it correctly? That major cut was the biggest in the state of Missouri at the time. If you said the Hooker Cut, you're exactly right. Named after the small town of Hooker, Missouri, which was nearby. It also served as a major template for how we would design our interstate system later on. Route 66, a highway built by the Dreamers, Part 1. Route 66. You probably picture it like a postcard, a 57 Chevy rolling under neon lights, a jukebox playing somewhere, drifting through a diner door, mom and pop motels with vacancy signs glowing, families headed west, maybe to the Grand Canyon, or maybe all the way to Disneyland. And honestly, that picture's not all that far off. From 1946 to 1965, Route 66 was in its prime, the era when it truly became the main street of America. But there's a part that most people miss in all that nostalgia. None of it would have mattered without the folks already out there building lives along the road. I'm talking about the dreamers, not the daydreamers, but the doers, the welders, the bakers, the war veterans and the waitresses, the business owners who took a chance, the ones who turned the Mother Road into a string of opportunities. So today, we're taking a different kind of trip, a metaphorical road trip, one stop at a time, all the way from Chicago to Los Angeles. And along the way, we're going to introduce you to 10 dreamers who helped make Route 66 the legend it became. But there's too much road and too many stories to tell for just one trip. So we're dividing the journey up in two. In part one, we'll leave the Windy City and drive all the way to the plains of Texas, landing at the midpoint in Adrian. Along that route, you'll meet the first 5 of the dreamers who made Route 66 shine. In part 2, we'll keep going through New Mexico, Arizona, and all the way to California. Along that route, you'll meet 5 dreamers who helped keep the western portion of Route 66 alive. This is the golden age of Route 66 as told through the stories of the dreamers who made it what it was. Come along with us because we're going beyond the exit. After World War II, America started to move again. Between 1945 and 1960, the number of vehicles on U.S. roads doubled. The GI Bill helped more than 7 million veterans buy homes, start businesses, and hit the highway. Families packed up and headed west. Some were chasing opportunity, others just needing a new beginning. And for many, it was something that they'd never done before, a family road trip. And Route 66 was there to connect them. It wasn't the only road west, but it became the one they remembered, not just for where it went, but for what and who was waiting along the way. So here's what we're going to do. Imagine you've jumped in the car with us, and we're heading west from the Windy City. The trip kicks off in Chicago, right past Lou Mitchell's, where folks have been grabbing breakfast since before the Mother Road had a name. We roll through the south side, into open farmland, and past the towns that frame the start of the journey. Joliet, Pontiac, and Bloomington. Somewhere along the way, we definitely passed a few Burma Shave signs. As we keep moving, the road hugs the rails. McLean and the Dixie Truckers' homes roll past. And not far beyond that, we hit the state capital, Springfield, and the birthplace of something a little unexpected. It was here that Route 66 picked up the scent of something new. A returning veteran named Ed Waldemeier Jr. had a knack for invention. After tasting battered sausages during the war, he teamed up with a friend to recreate them stateside. They called their little invention the Krusty Cur, a name that Ed's wife, Virginia, hated. So they came up with something better, Cozy Dogs, complete with a hand-drawn logo of 2 hot dogs in love. By 1949, the Cozy Dog Drive-In opened on Route 66. It was fun, it was fast, and it was pure Americana. A battered dog on a stick you could eat right in a car. The food wasn't fancy, but it stuck with people. I mean, just the name made you smile. And like Ed and Virginia, it just fit the road. They didn't set out to be famous, but like so many dreamers along Route 66, they left their mark. After you leave Springfield, the road opens up into the flatlands of central Illinois. If you're lucky, you might drive the last remaining brick stretch of Route 66 in Auburn, still paved the way it was back in the 1930s. Before long, you crossed the Mississippi, either at the old MacArthur Bridge downtown or further north on the Chain of Rocks Bridge, with its signature curve looking like a portal into another world. St. Louis rises ahead, and in the 1950s, the Gateway Arch hadn't even been built yet. Heading west through Gray's Summit, you'd pass the Diamonds, at the time the largest roadside diner in the world. And then the road starts to twist, because you're starting to enter the Ozarks now. And in those Ozarks, there was a town called Cuba, Missouri, where a husband and wife named John and Winifred Mathis bought a modest little motorport and turned it into something truly special. After World War II, they expanded the property and gave it a new name, the Wagon Wheel Motel. John even designed the neon sign himself right there at the kitchen table. The cabins were trimmed in beautiful Ozark stone, and the on-site cafe offered a warm meal and a soft landing for travelers cutting through the hills. In an era where America was falling in love with the road, the wagon wheel gave people a place to rest, to recharge, and feel at home. They probably never imagined that decades later, their neon sign would still be glowing in the night, and their little motor court would go on to become the longest-running, continuously operated motel on the entire route. Next up, you'll pass Merrimack Caverns, part roadside attraction, part natural wonder. As you push west towards Springfield, Missouri, one of Route 66's birthplaces, you'll eventually land in Joplin, where neon motels promised air-cooled rooms and kids begged their parents to stop for candy at roadside stands. Then it's into the corner of Kansas, where Route 66 only tracks 13 miles, but doesn't waste a minute. First comes Galena, gritty and full of mining town character. Then Riverton, where you can stop at the Eisler Brothers store, have a sandwich made fresh, and grab a cold pop. Just a few more miles, and that brings you through Baxter Springs. And then Oklahoma. The land opens up wide. So does the sky. Before too long, you find yourself on the doorstep of Tulsa, Oklahoma, an old boom town dressed in Art Deco, with the skyline that still nods to the wealth that built it. It was here in the 1950s that the Golden Driller made his first appearance, a 76-foot-tall tribute to the men who were brave enough to bring that black gold out of the ground. After Tulsa, you feel the change of reaching the countryside again, as the horizon opens back up in front of you. And so does the weight of the story. Because out here, the road wasn't just a route. It was a question. Where are you welcome and where are you safe? And just outside of Oklahoma City, one family answered both those questions loud and clear. Allen Threet Sr., a black homesteader, established a 160-acre property near Luther, Oklahoma in the early 1900s. For decades, it offered more than just fuel. It was a haven in a country still divided by Jim Crow. At a time when most towns weren't safe for black travelers, the Threet Station stood as a quiet but powerful outpost on the edge of Route 66. It welcomed everyone. The Threets built more than just a gas stop. They added a cafe, a small outdoor stage, even a baseball field where Negro League teams would sometimes come to play. Next door, they opened up a small diner called the Black Mamba, named in honor of boxing legend Joe Louis. And when someone needed to stop for the night, they let them stay, free of charge. Allen's children and grandchildren carried the work forward into the 50s and 60s, running the cafe and the pubs, keeping the station alive across generations. And for many, this was one of the only places on Route 66 where safety, dignity, and community came with a tank of gas. Back in the car and rolling west from Luther, we passed through Arcadia, home to the famous round barn that's been a part of the roadside landscape since 1898. Just past Arcadia, you find yourself in Oklahoma City and its Capitol building, home to stockyards and rodeos. In El Reno, the air fills with the smell of onion-fried burgers, a local staple that clings to the booths and lingers in the memories. West of there, the road starts to rise, climbing into Oklahoma's red soil country. Route 66 crosses the South Canadian River on a stretch of steel and concrete known simply as the Pony Bridge. 38 golden trusses linking Bridgeport to the open prairie. By the time you reach Hydro, it feels like the old service stations are leaning into the wind, holding fast to their place on the road. And at one of them, a woman named Lucille Hammonds was holding on strong, not realizing that someday she would become a legend of the highway. In 1941, she and her husband Carl took over a small filling station in Hydro, Oklahoma, built in 1921 by the Provine family, and they gave it a new name, Lucille's Place. They added a few motel cabins out back, and over time the station became more than just a pit stop. It became kind of a landmark. When Carl purchased a truck in the 1950s, Lucille stayed at the business and kept it going on her own. She lived upstairs and raised their 3 kids, and ran the station day and night. If someone needed help, she gave it. If a traveler didn't have money, well, they could trade a can of food or a broken appliance, whatever they had. Over time, her kindness earned her a new name, the Mother of the Mother Road. Lucille fed a lot of hungry people, and she laughed with folks who were down on their luck, and she never let the road harden her, even though doing it all alone easily could have. In an interview later in life, long after the station had closed, Lucille was asked why she never wanted to leave or travel. Her answer, "Why would I want to travel if everyone comes to me?" From there, the road rolls through Clinton and Foss, past motels and cafes filled with oil workers and road trippers. As you head on into the Texas Panhandle, you reach Shamrock, where neon from the U-Drop Inn lit up the prairie sky. Then it's on to Amarillo, a big, busy cowboy town with stockyards, smoky barbecue, and enough neon to light your way through the dust. Eventually, you'd find yourself in the middle of everything. Adrian, Texas, Today, it's known as the official midpoint of Route 66, but back then, it was just home to a guy, his diner, and a stretch of road that ran through both. Jesse Fincher was a World War II Army vet. After the war, he settled in Adrian and opened Jesse's Cafe, a simple place with warm food, a Phillips 66 station next door, and a sign out front that said what mattered: homemade pies. He didn't have gimmicks, but he didn't need them. He had good food, a good heart, and a spot that couldn't have been better placed. For more than 20 years, Jesse served up comfort food to families, truckers, and travelers just passing through. Every small town had a place like Jesse's. He just happened to sit at the center of it all. Well, we're now in Adrian, Texas. At the midpoint of the route, we're 1,139 miles away from Chicago, but we're also that far away from Los Angeles as well. In our next video, you're going to meet 5 more dreamers as we drive through New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Along that route, you'll meet a lady who left grace at every traveler's doorstep, and 2 brothers that in the future would help keep Route 66 alive. Route 66, a highway built by the dreamers. Part 2. Every mile of Route 66 has a story. Some are written in neon, some in dust and grit, but most, they were written by the people who built their lives along the road. In our last video, we began a journey down Route 66 during its heyday, from Chicago to the Texas Plains, and we met the folks who turned this highway into a way of life. But the story didn't stop there. Today, we're headed west into the mesas and the high desert and the sun-baked edges of California to meet the dreamers who held on, built big, and helped make Route 66 a legend from end to end. Come along with us, because we're going beyond the exit. As you leave Texas, you pass through Glen Rio, a town that straddles the state line. If you didn't stop there, your next real pause was a little further down the road, Tucumcari, New Mexico. Back then, Tucumcari felt like an oasis in a sea of sagebrush. Billboards lined Route 66 with just 2 words: Tucumcari tonight, a promise of comfort in the middle of nowhere. And no one delivered on that promise like Lillian Redmond. She and her husband Floyd took over the Blue Swallow Motel just after World War II. But after Floyd passed, Lillian made it her life's work. She added colorful tile work, she kept her room spotless, and she proudly advertised on her beautiful neon sign, 100% refrigerated air. And like Lucille back in Oklahoma, Lillian believed she was there to help. If a traveler couldn't pay, she'd trade. She always made room for someone in need. To Lillian, generosity wasn't the exception, it was policy. But Lillian also left something else behind for every guest, a little printed benediction tucked into each room. Because this motel is a human institution to serve people, and not solely a money-making organization, we hope that God will grant you peace and rest while you are under our roof. May your journey be safe. We are all travelers from birth till death, traveling between the eternity. That wasn't marketing, that was her mission. For more than 40 years, Lillian weathered the storms of the changing road, offering travelers not just shelter, but a little grace and a lot of hope, and a reminder that kindness still had a place on Route 66. And if you pass through Tucumcari tonight, the Blue Swallow still stands. West of Tucumcari, you roll through Santa Rosa, where road-tripping kids once dove into the deep blue chill waters of a natural spring called the Blue Hole. In Albuquerque, neon flickers, drawing in travelers along its central avenue. After crossing the Rio Grande, the road stretches out again, past the Sandias and past the sprawl. Once here, the landscape starts to change. Dark lava beds, the Malpais, ripple across the ground like frozen waves. Mesas rise in the distance, casting long shadows. Route 66 quiets down. And tucked into this rugged stretch of western New Mexico, there's a garage that held on longer than most. Roy Herman was born in Archer City, Texas, but by the time Route 66 was in its prime, he'd made his home in Thoreau, New Mexico. After serving in the Air Force, he bought a Standard oil station in 1950 and turned it into Herman's Garage and Service Station. Now, it wasn't flashy, no souvenir stands or neon signs, just a clean shop, a full tank, and a man who kept his word. But Roy made it his own. He and his son ran the place side by side, serving everyone who came through, locals, long haulers, and families headed west. His station wasn't just a stop, it was part of the road's rhythm, reliable, honest, and rooted. And like many of the places along Route 66, it wouldn't last forever. Crossing into Arizona, the land opens way up, long, flat stretches, painted in dusty reds and faded greens. You might swing by the old Painted Desert Trading Post or catch the edge of the Petrified Forest National Park. The towns get further apart, but the signs, they didn't stop. Giant arrows, TP motels, billboards teasing something just ahead. And then out of nowhere, it shows up, a giant jackrabbit, and a sign that says exactly what you need to hear. Here it is. That's really all the sign said. Here it is. But if you were driving Route 66, you knew what it meant. In 1949, James Taylor opened the Jackrabbit Trading Post just outside Joseph City. From Missouri to Arizona, Taylor painted bright yellow billboards with a leaping jackrabbit, counting down the miles to his little outpost in the desert. When you got there, a giant concrete rabbit was waiting out front. It was weird, it was wonderful, and it more importantly worked. Families pulled over. Kids and a few adults climbed up on the rabbit. Cameras clicked. He leased the trading post in 1961, and since then, it's stayed in the same family, passed down through generations. And yes, it's still going today. Now, west of Joseph City, you pass through Winslow, long before Glen Fry was ever standing on a corner. In Flagstaff, the pines rose high. Then it was down the mountain, out of the trees, and into the sun-blasted belly of Arizona. And there, like a mirage in chrome and hand-painted signs, sits the town of Seligman. It doesn't just welcome you, it winks at you. If Route 66 had a personality, this is where it came alive. And it had a sense of humor, too. And that came from Juan Delgadillo. In 1953, Juan built the Snowcap Drive-In out of scrap lumber and a lot of elbow grease. The menu promised cheeseburgers with cheese and dead chicken. And customers, they left with food, a smile, and probably a prank. Juan didn't just run a restaurant, he ran a comedy act on concrete. Next door, his brother Angel was cutting hair and minding his pool hall, and quietly watching the travelers, listening to their stories, and more importantly, feeling the pulse of the road with every season. And for a moment, this place, this stretch of asphalt, felt like the center of the universe. Now, the desert stretches long and wide. You cross the Colorado River at Topac and roll into California. The final frontier. The Mojave sun, man, it hits you hard. Royce Motel in Amboy rises out of the heat like a mirage, its Googie-style sign slicing the sky. Not too far away is the refurbished ghost town of Calico, California, and the towns of Barstow and Victorville. And then, as if the road was exhaling, the land tilts toward citrus groves and suburbia. Just east of Los Angeles, Joe Bono carried on a family tradition that started back in the 1930s. By the 40s, his parents had built Bono's Restaurant and Deli along Route 66 in Fontana, serving pasta, wine, and warm conversations to locals and travelers alike. Joe took over the 1960s and put his own stamp on the place, a bold one. He added a great big orange, a citrus-shaped juice stand. It screamed, "Look at me," right beside the highway. And just like that, the road begins to fade into some of the oldest freeways in the nation. Palm trees lean overhead and traffic thickens, and the wide open stillness of the desert gives way to the sprawl of Southern California. The Pacific Ocean isn't far now. Whether you've made it all the way to Santa Monica or stopped somewhere along the way, you'd feel it. The end of the road, but more importantly, the start of something else. We met a lot of dreamers along this journey, but the people behind the counters weren't the only ones. The travelers were dreamers too. They chased opportunity, escape, and something different, discovery. They loaded up their hopes and hit the road. And Route 66 didn't just carry them west, it carried their dreams, mile by mile. But sadly, even dreams can get detoured. By the late 1960s, something bigger and faster loomed ahead. An interstate system that promised speed, but stripped the soul from the journey. In the next video, we'll explore what happened when the road began to go quiet. Not just how Route 66 declined, but what we lost along the way. The title of our next video, Route 66, The Day the Road Went Quiet. It was great having you along on our ride today. Thanks for watching, and God bless. Route 66, the day the road went silent. Well, like it or not, all good things must come to an end. Route 66 is no exception. So today we're going to dig deeper into that. They called it the Main Street of America, and for a time it was. Route 66 stretched nearly 2,500 miles from Chicago to Santa Monica, carrying freight, families, and post-war dreams across 8 states. But this wasn't just a road. It was also a symbol of freedom, of progress, of possibility. With post-war prosperity came something new, disposable income, and real time off. So families packed up the car, hit the highway, and in doing so, built a roadside economy from scratch. Motels, diners, gas stations, and the inevitable tourist traps. Route 66 didn't just connect places, it supported them. It was noisy, it was crowded, and it was alive. But that was all about to change. Across the Mid and Southwest, towns that once thrived on highway traffic began to empty out. Diners closed, hotels faded, tourists stopped showing up, and the road that once defined movement in America began to go silent. What changed? And why did it happen so fast? More importantly, why did no one stop it? And Route 66? Well, it's ironic. The road that everyone remembers is the one they took off the map. So sit back and relax as we tell you all about it. Route 66, the day the road went silent, as we go beyond the exit. By the early 1950s, Route 66 was strained. The road had been built for an earlier generation of cars and traffic. Now, it was struggling under the weight of a booming nation. Many parts of Route 66 were 2-lane roads with no shoulders, sharp turns, and dangerous crossings. Fatal crashes were increasing, and delays were common. In 1955 alone, nearly 40,000 Americans died in traffic accidents. There were over 62 million registered vehicles on the road, 52 million of them passenger cars. Enter President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He had seen the consequences of bad roads firsthand. In 1919, he crossed the country with a military convoy. It took 62 days. During World War II, he saw how Germany's Autobahn allowed troops and supplies to move quickly across the country. He came home convinced the U.S. needed something better. In 1956, Eisenhower signed the Federal Highway Act, authorizing $25 billion to construct 41,000 miles of a newly engineered system called the Interstate Highway. It was the largest public works project in American history. But the plan wasn't to improve Route 66 or any of the other highways. It was to bypass them. And once the blueprint was in place, they didn't waste any time putting it to work. Well, not really. You see, it didn't all happen at once. Most folks probably picture the interstate as going in like railroad tracks, start at one end and build to the other, and call it done. But that's not how it worked. The system came together piecemeal, one funded section at a time. Illinois, Missouri, and Oklahoma started tearing into Route 66 as early as 1957, barely a year after the highway bill passed. But in other places, construction dragged on. Some stretches sat in limbo for years, waiting on surveys, easements, or funding. And the irony? In the places where the interstate wasn't finished yet, drivers had to exit the new road and merge right back on to good old Route 66, the very highway it was replacing. In some places, it took nearly 29 years for Route 66 to be bypassed, which I imagine most of the business owners were appreciative of that, even though they may not have fully understood what was going to happen once it came through. We're going to look at some maps now to give you an idea of where Route 66 was and where the interstate came through on its bypass. So with this knowledge, why don't we go on and see how it went down along the Mother Road. The first cuts came in Oklahoma. In 1953, the state had opened the Turner Turnpike, an 88-mile toll road linking Tulsa to Oklahoma City. Now that road bypassed Route 66 in towns like Luther, Wellston, Chandler, and Stroud, and it pulled the traffic with it. By 1954, over 8 gas stations had closed, including Ray's Texaco in Wellston, a long-time stop for both truckers and tourists. Then in 1957, the Will Rogers Turnpike extended the bypass east to the Missouri line, which completely cut out the small 13-mile stretch in Kansas. The towns of Galena, Riverton, and Baxter Springs were skipped entirely. The same turnpike also rerouted traffic around a long stretch of northeastern Oklahoma. Afton, once a busy stop for its filling stations and motor courts, was left without direct access. Much of the old Route 66 traffic never came back, especially once the turnpike built over itself, literally placing a giant travel plaza right in the middle of I-44 in Hydro, Oklahoma, home of Lucille Hammond's famous roadside gas station. They lost their stream of travelers around 1966 as I-40 pushed through. The new highway ran just south of town, close enough to see, but with no exit. People just passed on by. And then there was the town of Arlington, Missouri. Instead of bypassing near it, they went completely over top of the valley it lay in. Not only that, they dismantled the bridge that was there that connected the town to nearby Jerome, effectively leaving Arlington abandoned at the end of an 8-mile stretch of road. Or there's the case of the town of Cuervo, New Mexico. Instead of going north or south of the town, the interstate went right through it, claiming eminent domain on the downtown of Cuervo, and nearly overnight creating a ghost town. In 1967, Atlanta, Illinois was bypassed by I-55. It wasn't exactly a large place, but it did have a bank and a school and multiple cafes. The Palms Grill Cafe in particular, which had a long mainstay and was famous for serving pies and lunches to travelers since back in the 30s. That same year, McLean, Illinois, just down the road, also saw the flow rerouted. It held on a little bit longer because of the Dixie Truckers' Home, one of the most famous stops on Route 66 and one of the oldest truck stops in the country. But the rest of the town shortly went dark. In the southwest in New Mexico, towns like San Fidel, Budville, and Cabarro lost most of their through traffic when I-40 was cutting through a straighter route to Albuquerque. Out in Arizona, I-40 was cutting straight lines through the desert, also sidestepping full towns. Winona, the little town that Bobby Troop wanted us to remember in his song Get Your Kicks on Route 66, lost its lifeline as late as 1977. Roadside attractions like Twin Arrows and Two Guns, Arizona, which were both tourist traps for sure, were completely bypassed by 1971. You could still see them from the interstate, but it was pretty hard to get to them. Out west, the famous oasis town of Amboy, California. Famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, because of Roy's Motel and Cafe. You've likely seen this sign before. It's definitely world famous. It was bypassed in 72. At its peak, Roy's sold over 70,000 gallons of gas in a year. It was pretty much all alone out in the desert. That all changed when I-40 veered miles north of where he was. Between the towns of Texola and Eric, Oklahoma, Texola being right on the Texas line, there was a section of 4-lane Route 66 that had already bypassed a 2-lane segment of Route 66. That in 1975 was then completely bypassed by Interstate 40. In Glen Rio, the little town that straddled the Texas and New Mexico border, had a row of motels, diners, and gas stations, and was completely bypassed in 1973. On that side, the road extended on to the little towns of Indy and then San Juan, New Mexico. Oddly enough, there was so little traffic on that section, and the asphalt was so expensive to maintain, they just tore it all up and let it go back to gravel and earth. Even the town of Seligman, Arizona was bypassed in 1978. So, over nearly a 30-year period, Route 66 was officially decertified in stages, with each state slowly stripping the numbers from the maps and the mile markers. But the symbolic end came in the little town of Williams, Arizona. On October 13, 1984, the final stretch of Interstate 40 opened around Williams. Within hours, Route 66 signs started coming down. By 1985, the federal government officially decommissioned Route 66. There would be no more maintenance, no more signage, and no more promises. Towns could still call it Route 66, but the U.S. highway system no longer recognized it. So, after the decommissioning, what was the net effect? Well, in 2000, the National Park Service commissioned a study to understand what had happened to the communities along Route 66 after the interstates took over. Their findings were pretty sobering. 213 towns along Route 66 were bypassed by the interstate system. Within just 5 years of each of those bypasses, between 40 and 50% of the businesses that had been on the route were gone. In fact, over 2,400 businesses in all closed. Gas stations, motels, cafes, trading posts, and a whole list of other support businesses. At least 46 communities became ghost towns or were nearly abandoned. And in many rural areas, the bypass triggered a noticeable decline in population as families had to go find work elsewhere. The bypasses didn't just reroute traffic, they unraveled local economies. They shuttered livelihoods, and they left entire communities to fade into the silence. Towns that had once lived and died by the road. For a highway that once brought the country together, its departure wasn't met with protests or parades. In fact, there was no farewell at all, just silence. So was all that loss really worth it? Well, by the early 1970s, the facts were in. The highway fatality rate had dropped by nearly half, at that time judged by how many deaths there were per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, a direct result of improved design, divided highways, and fewer intersections. And to be fair, the interstates did work. Travel was faster, safer, and more direct. Crash rates did fall. Long-haul shipping became more efficient. The interstate system carried over 20% of all vehicle miles traveled in the U.S., despite covering just 1% of road mileage. But the price paid was real. Because on Route 66 and highways like it, the customers were coming back. And for a long time, nobody asked what had been lost. Not until a few voices along the old road began to speak up. In Seligman, Arizona, a local barber decided he had had enough, and it was time for him to act. That story about a town full of people that fought for their highway and historic status so we all could enjoy it today, that's going to be another video. Route 66 Revival. Well, everybody likes to talk about how Route 66 was removed from the maps, how it was decommissioned and mostly forgotten. What a lot of people don't tell you is how hard a small group of people in Arizona fought to get it back. In 1985, Route 66 was officially decommissioned. Just like that, the most famous highway in America vanished from the U.S. map. A National Park Service study later confirmed the fallout. More than 2,400 businesses closed. Nearly half of all traveler-based businesses on the route were gone within a few years. But the road didn't stay quiet for long. And what happened next didn't come from Washington or any top-down revival plan. It came from a barber in a bypassed Arizona town, a group of locals in a Route 66 diner, and a growing wave of people who refused to let the Mother Road disappear. This is the story of the rebirth of Route 66, and it's one of my favorite ones to tell as we go beyond the exit. Angel Delgadillo had been cutting hair in Seligman, Arizona since the 1950s. His shop doubled as a pool hall, and after work, he'd usually head down the street to help his brother Juan run the snow-capped drive-in. He knew Route 66 firsthand because he lived it. Families, truckers, tourists, they all came through. But in 1978, I-40 opened up, and just like that, like a faucet turning off, all that traffic was gone. Seligman wasn't a stop anymore, it was just a place people skipped. Inevitably, businesses closed. Things got really quiet, and they stayed that way for nearly 10 years. For Angel, though, it felt like the government had erased them on purpose. On February 18th, 1987, he had had enough. In his little town of Seligman, he reached out to his fellow businessmen and leaders and called a meeting at the Copper Cart Diner, which was just down the street from his shop. 15 people showed up. It may have been just a few, but it was enough. That night, they formed the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona. It was the first one in the country, and Angel took the lead. And they had a plan of action. They opened a gift shop just a few weeks later to help the movement and attract travelers. They launched a statewide letter and phone campaign targeting the Arizona DOT and Tourism Office. They showed up in person at chamber meetings and state tourism hearings, pressing for official recognition of Route 66. They also organized the very first Route 66 Fun Run, a rolling car show all the way from Seligman to the California border that brought crowds, cameras, and headlines. It wasn't easy, and a lot of officials really didn't see the point. In their minds, the road was dead. Why would you worry about bringing it back? Well, it wasn't just as simple as Arizona coming in and saying, yes, you guys can have historic status. The road had degraded greatly in the last decade. In order for them to grant them historic status, the road had to be brought back up to state standard. Now, the state was going to put up their half of the money, but the counties it ran through had to agree to put up their half also, up to $10,000 per mile. But Angel and his neighbors kept pushing. On November 22, 1987, they got their answer. Arizona officially designated 159 miles of the old road, from Ash Fork, Arizona, all the way to Topak at the California border, as historic Route 66. And they were the first state to do it. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about proving the road still had value, and that Seligman still mattered. And it started with one barber who got tired of being forgotten and decided to fight back. Angel's battle and victory didn't go unnoticed. Word had got out, first to other towns in Arizona, then across the state line. What he and that small group pulled off in 1987 showed people that there was hope that they could do it too. They didn't need permission from Washington. They just had to believe the road was worth saving. So Missouri kicked it off first in 1989. They formed their own Route 66 Association, and by early 1990, they'd secured a state historic designation in Springfield, Missouri, where the road had originally been named back in 1926. Illinois followed after that. A group met in Pontiac in March of '89 and started cataloging the old road. By 1995, signs were up along the full route. In Auburn, they preserved a brick stretch of Route 66 from 1931. And it's still drivable today. In New Mexico, they went another route. In '94, they earned scenic byway status and focused on preserving neon landmarks, especially in Albuquerque. There, they even added Route 66 signage to city buses. And another thing happened. People were starting to notice this thing was gaining momentum. In Oklahoma, they had over 400 miles of Route 66, and the towns began to show their pride once again. People began restoring some of the older places along the route, like the volunteers who rebuilt the Round Barn in Arcadia. And over in Stroud, Don Welsh bought the old Rock Cafe and brought it back to life. Museums followed in Clinton and Elk City, putting the road's story on display. Kansas, even though it just had 13 miles of the road, wasn't going to be left behind either. Their association was formed in 1990 and poured their energy into Galena. Volunteers restored an old Canotech station there, patched up the Brush Creek Bridge, and lined the route with good old Burma shave signs. California joined in by the end of 1990. Victorville opened its Route 66 Museum in 1995, and cities like Barstow and San Bernardino brought back vintage motels, murals, and signage. Finally, Texas came on board. They had the second shortest stretch of Route 66. In '91, they formed their association and helped restore places like the U-Drop Inn in Shamrock and promoted the Midpoint Cafe in Adrian, exactly 1,139 miles from both ends of the road. By the mid-'90s, every Route 66 state had joined in this revival. Places were being restored, but more importantly, some pretty important people were starting to take notice. While local groups were bringing the road back mile by mile, something else happened, something that reached people far beyond Route 66. In 1990, a journalist named Michael Wallace published Route 66, The Mother Road. It wasn't just a history book, it was a storybook for grown-ups. It was a road trip in print. He wrote about diners and motels, mechanics and families who gave the road its soul. For a lot of readers, it was the first time they realized the road wasn't gone. It had just been forgotten. The book hit the bestsellers list, and it kicked off a wave of renewed interest. Suddenly, new documentaries, travel shows, even coffee table books were coming out about the route. In 1997, National Geographic ran a full-length feature that put Route 66 right back into the national conversation. By the early 2000s, it wasn't just Americans paying attention either. Route 66 started showing up in overseas travel guides, but the biggest boost? Well, that came in 2006, when Disney Pixar released the movie Cars. Now, there's a lot of people that may not know that director John Lasseter had taken a break after a string of some stellar hits, but definitely some endless hours working. He decided to spend the summer traveling with his family. Most of their road trip was directly on old Route 66. Well, that trip stuck with him. Quiet towns, old signs, stories that felt half-finished. When they started developing Cars, Lasseter brought the Pixar crew on a research trip, and they hired none other than Michael Wallace to guide them.
It's not the destination, it's the journey. You know, it's all right to get lost, it's all right to spend time, it's all right to stop.
He didn't just show them landmarks, he introduced them to the people still fighting to keep the road alive. In Seligman, they met Angel Delgadillo. He told them what it was like the day the interstate opened.
When we were bypassed at about this time of the day, 1:30, 2 o'clock, the world stopped. The world just forgot about us. But it didn't come back to normal for 10 long years.
And that story helped shape the heart of the film. And for those who have listened very closely, you may know that the voice of the sheriff in the movie is Mr. Mike Wallace himself. And when Cars hit theaters, it definitely struck a nerve. After the success of the movie, towns along Route 66 started seeing younger travelers and more international ones. The people weren't just passing through anymore. They were stopping. They were asking questions. And thankfully, they were spending money. The once forgotten highway had re-entered pop culture full tilt. For nearly a decade, the revival of Route 66 was driven by locals, people like Angel, and dozens of small-town groups that picked up where he had left off. But eventually, even Washington would take notice. In 1999, Congress passed the Route 66 Corridor Preservation Act. Now, it didn't go as far as to declare the road a monument or a park. It wasn't about control, but it was about support. The law created a matching grant program under the National Park Service. If a business or nonprofit wanted to restore a Route 66 landmark, the government would match their effort, dollar for dollar. And this program that launched in 2001 ran over the next 2 decades, definitely helped funding more than 170 projects. And they weren't just small roadside repairs. The grants went toward neon restorations, bridge reinforcements, roof replacements, foundation stabilization, and full-scale restorations of motels, cafes, and historic buildings tied to the old alignment. In total, the program issued $2.02 million in federal grants, which unlocked another $3.4 million in private matching funds. Then, in 2012, Rutgers University conducted a major impact study. Route 66 travelers were spending over $130 million annually, just across 6 of the 8 states. The money supported more than 2,000 full-time jobs, more of them in small towns. According to the study, 30 to 50% of the visitors were international. 83% of the business owners said Route 66 traffic was the reason they were still open. Today, you can still see the result. For once, the government didn't pave over the past. It helped keep it standing. By the time the Corridor Preservation Program wrapped up in 2019, Route 66 had already become something bigger than anyone imagined. It wasn't just a nostalgic trip anymore. It was a full-blown economic engine. especially for small towns that had once been left behind. In Seligman, where the revival began, businesses that once stood empty now see thousands of visitors every year. Travelers come from all over the world, whether it's Europe, Japan, Australia, just to meet the man who saved Route 66. My wife Kim and I had the chance to do that very thing in 2023. And to be honest, we were a little nervous and starstruck, almost too scared to go up and talk to him. After we said our hellos and took a picture or two, then we asked him about his story. You could tell it was one he'd told a lot of times. And if you've seen any of his interviews, he starts it off this way. It wasn't necessarily about him. It was what they were able to accomplish. He said, "We the people did it." Nearly 40 years after it was removed from the U.S. highway system, Route 66 is back on the map. Not because anyone gave it permission, but because they fought for that right. Now the road is heading into its next chapter. In 2026, Route 66 turns 100, and there's a growing push to give it a permanent protection. In 2018, Congress introduced multiple bills to designate Route 66 a National Historic Trail. It would put it in the same category as something like the Lewis and Clark Trail, preserved in law, recognized across the country. And while the bills have gained bipartisan support, they still haven't passed yet. Still, a movement behind it is growing. And even where the U.S. government doesn't pick up, state governments have begun to help. But the most exciting part is that the next generation, younger generations, are starting to keep it going. Cars was 19 years ago, and the younger generation that saw it as children have grown up and have kids of their own. And they're going back out to visit their own Radiator Springs. They're not driving it to relive the past because they weren't there. They're driving it to experience what the past left them. Route 66 may not be on most maps anymore. In fact, you'll have a hard time finding it on a GPS either. But it's still out there, and it's waiting for you. And in 2026, I'd say that it's going to be an exciting time to go out and get your kicks on Route 66. If this was something you like, please let us know. As we're building out these stories and you'd like to have them in one place, we'll be glad to make another one for you. If you haven't taken the time to, please like the video. That way it'll go further on YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed yet, why don't you go ahead and hit that button and join us along for more stories about two-lane America. As always, we really appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching, and God bless.